Thrilled to be here. I'm an associate professor at the University of Toronto, and we might also have Jeff Verrazano here as well, and some speed cubers. Actually, if the speed cubers are here, Sydney and I think it was one of them isn't here. It's Sydney and Lucas. If they're here, they can come up and sit up near the front as well and join us. Just briefly, a couple things just personally about the cube. I was not able to solve it when I first got my hands on it. So for me, I learned to solve this invention by Professor Rubik from this amazing book by Jeff Verrazano, Jeff Conquers the Cube. So that's where I learned from the book and then modified it. And I don't know whether you're aware of this, but Jeff runs a restaurant here in Atlanta. If you haven't been, if you visit it, you will see cube roots all over the place. So it's intentional. You know, it's a reminder of the role he played with Rubik's invention. So you can go and visit his restaurant sometime. In the early 80s, I was running some Rubik's Cube contests at my high school. So I was using it as a teaching tool, the puzzle that Rubik invented, and I was using it to teach inverse functions and lots of different things. And this contest that I was running attracted the attention of some media, and I was actually really fortunate because the Ideal Toy Company brought me in as a consultant to help organize all the contests across Canada. And Professor Rubik may not remember this, but we spent a week together. So he came to Canada, and I was in charge of taking him around. And we had a wonderful lunch with all of the participants up in the CN Tower. It was the tallest freestanding structure in the world. So we had a wonderful lunch. The students loved being with him, as they did on Wednesday night. Nothing's changed. People are still absolutely in love with him and with his device, with his creation. This is a picture of Rubik and I when we were both a bit younger. I have a background in magic, and I was taking Rubik's cigarette and making it vanish. If anyone wants any tips on that, I'd be happy to share them with you. That's an inside joke for magicians. But you know, that actually led to some television commercials. I ended up being a consultant for several television commercials. One of them was for Becel Margarine. That was a very complicated commercial. All of these transitions occurring on the side of a cube. And it may well be that Professor Rubik never saw this commercial, wasn't even aware. There was another one for Cadbury's that I was involved in as well. This commercial, it was actually one of my students who was the hand bottle. They went through all sorts of hand bottles, and they couldn't find somebody who could work with it. That's what the cube looked like. That's a bit scrambled at that point. During the shooting of the commercial, the hand bottle dropped the cube and fell on the floor, and it was up to me to reset it. Like, where do you start? And I did reset it, but there was a center that was twisted 180 degrees. And we had to stop the shoot because I could not reset the thing. And in comes David's Singmaster, because I went home, and of course, I went through David's book, and sure enough, he had a move for just changing the centers. You never worry about this when you have a regular cube, because the centers are solid colors, and you don't even know they're moving. But David's book had a huge influence on me. So Professor Rubik's cube, that really had a role for, I think, all of us, but for me particularly in the classroom. David's book introduced me to group theory and all sorts of other things. I have a pretty big collection of books at home, maybe around 50, 60 different books, and you can't see very well in this picture, but the book of David Singmaster's is really, it's just tattered. It's like a mess because I've used the book so much. By the way, in this picture here, Professor Rubik probably doesn't remember this, but when he left for Hungary, he kindly gave me a couple boxes, they're in the upper right corner, of original Rubik's Cubes from Hungary that I still have. I've never opened them. So these are the original ones that he had brought with him, and they're just sitting at home. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with them someday, but anyway. There were so many things that I learned from David's book. If you haven't looked at the book, it's something that you may want to look up. So I think Professor Rubik, for all of us, he's really made a difference in our world. And I have a little pun there with the 12 worlds. But I'd really like to thank you for coming all this way to be with us. And David, I'd like to thank you as well. And Jeff, you've arrived. You actually had a huge influence on me as well, because it's where I learned to solve the cube. So I think for all of us, these three people have really had an influence on our love for the cube and our love for mathematics. So thank you to the three of them. So I'm going to kind of moderate this with some questions. And what I'm hoping happens is that I'll maybe direct some of these to Professor Rubik, but I'd like David and Jeff to also jump in, at different times with them. So, maybe the first one these questions have been gathered from different sources here. So the first one that seemed to be a popular question to ask you was, what can you tell us about, just briefly, the math tradition in Hungary when you grew up? And you're mic'd, right? So I think you have a mic. Or did they give you one? Okay.
It works. Hungary, it's a small country, according to yours. But it's known on several reasons. We have several Nobel Prize winners, and we have known people in many different areas, in music, arts, paintings, and so on and so forth. But we're known as well because of our mathematician mind. And I'm sure you heard about Erdős. I'm sure you heard about Neumann, and I don't want, that's a long list of names. So, and naturally, when kids grow up, he doesn't know what direction to move and so on, but I was all the time very open-minded, so I was interested in interesting things, and I find interest in many things. And I had no problem with math in school. Generally speaking, I can say I had no problem with school because I was not worried about school. I was not very keen to be the best, but especially in math, probably I was one of them between my schoolmates, but it's not a high level of achievement. Especially in grammar school when I studied art, paintings and then sculpturing, so it's not typical in that kind of school, the very interested about math. So I just, a few times ago, I wrote a section of one of my schoolmates writing some kind of books about his memories, and he mentioned the moments when me and our mathematical teacher were discussing in front of the table, and they laughed at that because they were free to do many things else because they don't understand what we are speaking about. So math all the time admires me, and I'm here, and I can say Gardner books helped on many ways on that. So in that time it was not very easy to get this kind of books, but I have a small collection of it at home, and I keep it, and it reminds me these golden days when I was discovering this very strange but very interesting territory of life.
So one of the things people also would like to know is, was this the first mechanical creation of yours? Did you invent something before this?
I made the snake before, but the snake, it's not a puzzle, I can say. Naturally, you can find the puzzling questions in any kind of field. So, and you can formulate puzzles, and there are questions which are not answered yet in connection with the snake as well, because nobody catched and worked on that hardly. For example, that was a very common question in connection with the cube at the very beginning, how many possible arrangement you can have on the cube, but nobody knows yet how many, and I don't know how many arrangements you can make with the snake. That's not an arrangement of patterns, it's an arrangement of three-dimensional elements in space. So, but the snake is some kind of creative tool to play and understand some relationship with space, and you can create interesting forms and shapes. What is remind you something, but from the real world,
sure.
like anything, so I can
You know, when peop-
staircase from staircase to kitten and many other things. So that's dogs and many and wolf, and you can create limited on your only on your imagination.
You know, people have also wondered what your motivation was for, like, creating the cube.
Yeah.
Like, what was going on?
The reason why I did it.
If there was one. Might have been just play.
It's how can I say? I was. If you have an interest about an area of life and different kind of perspectives of life, I can say I was very close to geometry, and especially three-dimensional geometry, and partly I was teaching it, partly I was searching it, and it was connected. My main profession, I can say, if I have any, it's architecture and design, and with all of it works in space and using elements. For example, if you are thinking about systems where you are try to creating elements which are capable to form different arrangement and have a different use. So that's to transformation. It's all the time excited me as a wonderful thing, because you keep something and and in the same time something newborn. So that's
I spoke with Bill Ritchie yesterday from Think Fun, and he was telling me that it's about a year from when something comes into his door and the product is made. So for your cube, what was the timeline between the concept and the first twistable prototype?
So I was teaching, and I was looking for examples and tools for teachings, demonstrations, and where I can mention different ideas and understandings. And nature, I learned in the school a long time ago about platonic solids, which are very interesting. And later on, if you are thinking on it and you are, have a deeper knowledge, you know the most interesting part of it, the symmetries, what you can find, different ones. And I choose the cube as a very, how can I say, the most common and most useful form of shape. And you know, the bricks are related to that, and we use the bricks to build up our buildings. And the cube is familiar with everybody, and the cube has a very, because of its simplicity and tremendous level of regularities, it's catches the mind and the fantasy of people. In many religions, the cube has a very important key element and illustrate different ideas. And the life of three, you can, I'm sure you remember that picture, and many other things. That's one part. The other part is I like puzzles in general from my very young childhood, and sometimes I had the problem there. It seems to me they are too easy, so I was looking something more difficult, more possibilities. For example, the Sembloid 15, it's a puzzle. It's over 100 years old, and but for me it was not very interesting, because you can do it so at once, so very, very fast. So, but catch my mind, for example, the magic squares, which is another type of thing. It is two-dimensional. The 15 puzzle is two-dimensional. So I was interested about very much three-dimensional and to find something there. And my basic idea was to create a structure containing elements. You can change the positions of elements, but in the same time they remain one unit. So that's the basic idea, and I had the feeling the cube is very capable to achieve with this goal, but it was not an easy task. So it's really something, but most creative people I can agree with me. If something at the first sight seems impossible, that's a big challenge, and to beat that's a very interesting work and enjoyment.
So several people have asked a question wondering, they're picturing you with the first prototype sitting in front of you. What did you do?
So
what did you do with it?
In my way of thinking, I'm usually, it's not I try to reach my goals not in a theoretical way, but in a practical way. So in the meantime, when I have something, an idea, naturally I'm making sketches, but at once, practically go to the workshop and do something. So, and I love things to handle, I love things to modify material and that kind of thing. So I was able to create, and using materials which are very common and it's easy to modify. That's, one is paper in general, and another one is because our workshop was in connection with furniture design. We were working with wood, and I love wood, and I made my first prototypes.
David,
wood.
for you, when you first had the cube in your hand, and Jeff, what did you do? I mean, what?
Well, do I have
It should be on. No, it should be on.
No, it's just all right. I came across the cube at the International Congress of Mathematicians in Helsinki in 1978. And people knew I had an interest in puzzles and games, and they said, "Have you seen the new toy that Conway has?" And then I discovered Penrose also had one. And it turned out I had a friend who was a good friend of Tamás Varga, the leading Hungarian educator of the day. And Varga had discovered, as the Hungarians had in those days, they weren't allowed to carry hard currency, but they could take a suitcase full of cubes and sell them. And I managed to get the last one. I arranged to trade it for an M.C. Escher book. And I learned, I had a wonderful dinner one night with Conway and Penrose. And Conway explained the basics of the group theory of the cube, which I knew a bit about group theory, but not that much. And I soon realized that, I could do some of it. It took me about 2 weeks to realize that I could solve any position. I think Erno managed to do it in a week, but anyway. I had to write it down. He did it all in his head. And, but within 6 months, I had made contact with a Hungarian importer, and he had a supply of cubes. And within about 6 weeks, I had sold out what he thought would last him 2 years. And I also was receiving solutions from people in the post. And at the time, I was in a research fellowship at the Open University. So I had contacts, a large range of contacts. And every solution came in its own notation. Now, I don't know if you've tried to compare a solution written in one notation with a solution written in another notation to see whether there is any idea there that you want to get up. And I came up with a very crude notation, and then I realized that the answer was to get a much simpler notation, and I invented what is now the standard notation. And I wrote it up in a booklet, which I circulated in photocopied versions and then printed versions, and that started selling in large numbers. And John Conway, at one point at the previous gathering, said that he had a notation and somebody had come along and replaced it with another notation. And I said, that was me, John. And the reason was that your notation wasn't popular. It was a lousy notation. And in fact, he had based his notation on the colors of his cube. Already, even at that time, the colors were not standardized. And one of my friends had a cube, and his son was on the telephone trying to explain to somebody else how to solve the cube. Already, that's an awkward thing, but it turned out their cubes had different colors. So he was saying, right, now you turn the right face, the red face, that's blue on your cube. You know, and the
David,
complexities were amazing.
Did John react by saying to you, get a life?
No.
Okay, that's a bad pun. You get a life, sorry. Jeff.
I still prefer the original color scheme because that's what I grew up with. Speaking of different notations, if any of y'all want to see at the end, I have in this box here all my old memorabilia, and I have a notation that was a handwritten notation written by Adam Shire, who wrote Siri. So he did the cube with me back in the day, and it's just sort of a cool little piece, if any of y'all want to take a picture of that later. And it's very different than, of course, the standard one. I got the cube. I was 13. I was just going on 14, and I didn't have any sense of it being a mathematical puzzle or anything. It was just, a kid had one, and I saw it, and I grabbed it from him, and I pretty much stole it. Like, I just wouldn't give it back to him for like a week, and until I put it together. And I was pretty obsessed with it. I mean, I was like day and night. I was up in my, before you had phones to play on all day, this thing really kept me up at night. And, but after about a week or so, I had done it, and then I put it away, didn't really think about it too much. And then a couple of months later, this was June of 1980, by the way, so this was really before the puzzle and you had it in 78, but this was really before the puzzle was big. And literally, I didn't know anyone that had it other than this one I had seen. And then a couple of months later, I picked it up again, and I realized that I could actually sort of do it a little bit more methodically, that I could develop. I came up with sort of a system for changing a limited number of things and then seeing what they would do. So kind of more of a structured experimentation system with it. And then through that, I was able very quickly to develop a 5-step system. And again, I put it away, didn't think about it. And then this was over the summer of 80. Christmas of 80, everyone got one. So when you came back in January of 81, it was everywhere. It was absolutely everywhere. My experience was that I was sitting in a math class, and some kid was just playing with it. And the teacher just screamed at him. She's like, "Put that stupid thing away. It's not possible anyway." So I was like, so I said I could do it. And she was like, "No way." So I did it for the whole class. And I was probably averaging 2.5 or 3 minutes at that time. And she was like, "You have to write this down. You have to write this down." So just a couple of days before this, someone had given me the cover story in Scientific American that was written by Douglas Hofstadter, who wrote Gödel Escherbach, so sort of related to some of the stuff going on here. And of course, it referenced Singmaster's notation. And so I was like, okay, yeah, I just saw this notation a couple of days ago, so I could write it up. So over the course of the weekend, I just got out, I was 14 years old at the time, I just got out colored pencils and started drawing sketches and started using his notation, and I wrote what eventually became, a few months later, my book. And then from there, it just, like, time started dropping very, very quickly. So I was probably averaging like 3 minutes in February, and by the summer, when there was the first competitions, I was down to like 45 seconds, and then in October, just 9 weeks later, I was down to 30, and then in November, when they did the nationals, it was down to like 26, 27. So times were dropping very, 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 very quickly at the time, and there were all these different solutions out there, but everyone was really like all the competitors were really private. Like no one wanted to share their solutions with everybody because we were competing. But it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun, and we got to go out and do all the talk shows and go to California. I just want to tell one little story about a commercial that I did that was sort of feeding off your story. I did an IBM commercial where I was just the consultant that was going to show the hand model how to move the cube. But because it was an IBM commercial, and because the stickers were just sort of handmade graphics by some graphics company, every time he turned the cube, they would just chip. So they were just not looking great on the camera. And they had like 10 sets, and they were getting down to the we don't even know if we could finish the commercial. So when they were down to the last two, I was like, why don't you just start with it solved and just have him scramble the cube and run it backwards? And that's what they ended up doing. So they didn't even really need me as the consultant.
Wow.
So it was pretty, but you couldn't do that now with all the finger moves that you guys do, which we couldn't do on the old cubes, because you wouldn't look right on camera. You have to hold it with your hand. You can't flick it in reverse.
Jeff, that cube that I showed in the picture there, that cube cost, like I was told, thousands of dollars to make, because they did not want actually, they gave me the cube at the end, which I still have, and tend not to touch it. When it dropped on the floor, there was this awful sound from the people involved in the commercial.
Yeah, this is before laser printers, so this was probably made in some photographic process. I don't know.
We've talked about the solutions here. Professor Rubik, was that something that was of interest to you? Was the solving of the cube, was that something that intrigued you?
That was the second phase of my way on the road. It's because I was not thinking about solving it, because at the first time my task was only to create the structure. When I succeed to have a working prototype, that makes me a big difference. Usually I'm not a person who is very keen to think only just a theoretical way, and paper pencil type of puzzles. I like to use materials and using my hands, not only for drawing. So and it works. And what is capable to do? To see that, you can't see in a monochrome cube. So you need to identify the pieces. There are so many different ways, but I choose colors to do that, because if you are using letters, figures, any kind of things, numbers, it's much more difficult to remember what happened, and it's much more difficult to recognize. They have orientation, they have can give you a very mixed picture. And I chose the colors, and because of the 6 sides, the 6 color was very natural the 6 color was very natural to use, and I was preferring these primary colors and what is between, and that's close to forming a circle, like in the Goethe circle about the colors. But I left pink and I put white, because I choose for the body black, because black is a very good background to have bodies, makes it much more bright. So that's and much more distinguishable. And it was there, and after that, getting the hard task. In that time, I was in a very good, easy position, because if I have any problem, I was able to take apart and put together again the puzzle. And I'm sure many of people use that kind of solution. And later on, I heard there are so many different kind of solutions, physical ones,
together.
Chemical ones, and so on and so forth. Repaint and so. But I tried to understand what's happening, and what one thing helped me, because I had the feeling about periodicity, so the periodical movement generate periodical result. And the interesting thing is when you are using only a limited number of axes and a limited type of movement, the result it's recognizable. So that means because the main problem with the cube is many things happen in the same time, so it's very difficult for our poor human mind to see what happened really. So we are searching to limit the changes, and nature the best one if there is only two pieces of changing or something like that. So, and you can recognize what happened in the movement. That's the practical algorithms to solve the cube in general. I had finally I have some kind of solution, but was not theoretically the best, but it works. So it worked. That was good enough for me because it proved me it's possible to make a normal and a poor human mind. So that's, you don't need to be a genius to do it. So that's because at the very beginning I was worried if there is only one way to go back, if you leave your territory, that's impossible because so many different ways, and it can be a long way, and if you make a wrong turn, you're lost forever. So that's, and after that I was able to demonstrate to my partners and potential partners, it's solvable. Nature, it was not an easy task to put it on the market because the view for the toy people are a little bit different than my view for the world and for product. So they thought it's too difficult and people will not like it and so on and so forth. There is no music there. It's nothing funny, I can say, in their view. But unfortunately, the people proved they have more in their mind than usually we think. So sometimes it's one of, there are so many contradictions in connection with the cube, and one is why people are doing something but that generate troubles to them. Sometimes it proves they are not capable to do something but normal people can do, so something like that. And other interesting effect was kids were much more better than adults because they are much more open-minded, that's first. Secondly, they have a very good visual memory in young ages, and so on and so forth. So, and they can learn. That's their main task.
Well, we're seeing some of that today with the new solutions, and at the end, we'll have the speed cubers do a little demonstration, of some things. Just one question that I was just wondering about, Professor. Yeah, sure.
One thing. I was at the very, very first competition in the United States, which was in July 25th of '81 in Boston. And they actually had an adult category and a kids category because they thought that the kids would lose and they'd be disappointed. So they knew that was their bigger market, but they didn't want the kids to come in last, so to be crushed by the adults. But of course, that's just not what happened at all.
Disappointed.
Yeah, the adults were disappointed. And I think the toy company was also shocked because there were 1,100 participants, and they had only expected maybe 50 or 100. They had no idea what they were really in for, and it was the whole mall. It was flooded. And, well, anyway, I forgot my train of thought.
There's only one
Bob,
comment in connection, but David was speaking about the notation. All the time, if you find something what is practically works and good, it's an interesting question why. In my view, that's because it's a human kind of notation. So these three axes, which are the coordinate system, the right angle coordinate system, we are thinking on, living on, and usually oriented ourselves. It's very human. We say something is front of us, behind us, up, down, right and left. So that's a very human and very easy to know. And it's a relative in connection with our view.
One of the things that I think we've all noticed is that the invention, the cube, it's pervaded popular culture. I mean, we've all seen it in advertisements. And I just came back from Indonesia a couple days ago, and there's this huge ad in the airport with a cube in it. We've seen it in movies, we've seen it in commercials. It's just kind of everywhere. And I'm wondering, Professor Rubik, if there's any of these things that just surprised you or that really grabbed you. If there was anything that just it was like, wow, I can't believe that they've used the cube for this.
You know, the early days I was really not busy to pay attention to that kind of things. When I was preparing the Cube anniversary, the 40th anniversary, and the exhibition, I made some research, and that was really surprised me. Nature, right now, I was much in a better position to do such a thing because these 40 years was good enough to develop the internet, and that's much easier to find a huge amount of data and examples and pictures and many other things. So, and I was really amazed of that. Before that, naturally, I was traveling all around the world, and I met with people, and I've seen many interesting things, but all the time you think in this way, that must be an exception or something like that. But if you are facing with the 2 million videos on YouTube in relation with the cube or many other things, that makes a difference.
Sure. You know,
Has there ever really been anything that was so mathematical that really made it into pop culture? I just don't think so.
that's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ron, if I could just interject for a minute. We
We're-
are up against a hard time cutoff, so if you want to bring up speed cubers, you might want to think about doing that.
Absolutely. You know, this might be a good time just to make sure that we do get them up here. One of the things about the speed cubing, and I just thought I'd mention, is that it's pervaded into magic. So there are magicians that have tried to take a Rubik's Cube and solve it very quickly. I think the very first example of that was Doug Henning. So in one of his NBC specials, which was done live, no camera tricks, he took a scrambled Rubik's Cube, threw it up in the air a short distance, and caught it, and it was done. So that was an effort to speed cube, but with a bit of trickery. When I saw that, I kind of wondered, could I develop a method of my own? So I took a scrambled cube and just put it in my hands and just whisked it away, and it was done. So, so that's speed cubing with magic, where it was done in under a second. But we have some people here who really do it, speed cubing in incredible fast ways. So maybe we've got a couple of you. Maybe you could scramble your cubes up and just demonstrate to us. I can do some timing here. Or Jeff, if you want to, you can call, 1, 2, 3, go, if you'd like. And maybe you could do something cool. Do it with one hand, or blindfolded, or behind, just...
Well, I got my average down to about 20, 21 on really old school cubes. Now, I think that my solution is definitely an older solution. They've obviously had a lot more time to work out a lot of shortcuts and different methods. But I think my solution probably would be good for maybe 16 to 17. And after that, you really do have to switch to sort of the newer methods. Right now, I'm probably about 27 seconds in that range. But my favorite thing to do, and I do it in the restaurant, is if you scramble a cube, I'll match your scramble. So, and that takes about 1:15, but that's a pretty cool trick, actually. Yeah, I'll do it for y'all after. I don't know if I'll do it on stage here because it's a little long to demo, but probably want to see these guys. They could probably do it blindfolded, one-handed faster than I could do that.
Do you want to stay with them?
What's that?
Do you want to work with them?
Okay,
And I
I'll
can
sure.
call 1, 2,
Here,
3, go.
yeah,
So we have
sure.
Lucas here. We have Sydney. I've been enjoying watching them. You can come on up. And so what I can do is just call 1, 2, 3, go.
You want it one-handed?
Jeff can attempt to stay with them. Sorry, Jeff.
So they've agreed to do one-handed so that I can be competitive.
And maybe somebody could time this for me. Somebody right nearby has got something they can time it with. Just indicate that you're going to. I can't see. Sure, so we have somebody right here. So, 1, 2, 3, go.
sound of it is important.
Yes. Jeff, it's okay, we'll wait.
I made so many mistakes just now.
You know, what's really interesting is that when you follow Jeff's method in his best-selling book, you can tell that the cube is getting close to being done. You know, you can smell it. But in watching these two, and watching the cubes in their hand, it's just like you have no idea. It's just like it's all over the place, and then all of a sudden it's just boom, it's done. So it's really a very different method that's being used. Is there anything else that you'd like to do in addition to something one-handed? So something kind of cool?
I'm trying this.
Oh. So we'll get, what was the time, by the way?
Okay, we're down to 30 seconds left.
So, okay. In a moment, we'll thank the guests, but we'll have a...
Should we hold off? We can do it tonight.
We have a hard deadline for the buses, so maybe if you could do
Okay.
it tonight.
Tonight, absolutely. Look, I'd like to thank everybody for being here, particularly Professor Rubik.